Uncovering the Labyrinth of Ego, the journey to spiritual liberation. Today, we begin a deep exploration into the heart of our spiritual journey. We navigate the labyrinth of the ego. After learning what my videos teach, go on with your life as before. Don't worry about your old self. You will probably still think and feel the same as before. Such is the situation, at least at the beginning of this spiritual quest. But let's talk about the ego. Deep within each of us lies a force. It is our ego. It is difficult to define what the ego is because it changes shape through our psyche. The ego is a magician that convinces you of its unique truth. But what if I told you that his reign is a big fraud? So you have to be careful. The ego will always try to take control. It's all about control and autonomy. The ego wants to do it the ego's way. He may even keep up with your spiritual practices and pretend to be a spiritual seeker. But watch out for your ego because it is cunning and only wants control and dominance in your life. The I is an ominous, shadowy figure that constantly morphs, manipulating a person's perception of reality. We are bound to misidentify with this tyrant from birth. The ego masquerades as our identity, our desires, and our emotions. It is the voice that cries, "I am," and claims the temporal experiences of our human existence. However, you are not your ego. You are your consciousness. Consciousness is the eternal witness, the blue sky beneath the clouds of thought and illusion. You are the knowledge of the awareness of your consciousness. Your ego wants you to submit to it and will even promise you enlightenment, heaven, and salvation if you submit to it. He wants you to worship it and worship it. To begin the path of spiritual awakening is to recognize this deep truth. The truth that you are not your chattering mind where your ego hides. You are the peace and quiet behind your mind. It is knowing that you are not your ego, and this knowledge opens the narrow door to salvation. After that, all you have to do is surrender to this silence and the knowledge of your consciousness. You don't have to fight with your ego because it is the character you now think you are. This character will melt itself into the light of your consciousness. The journey will not be easy, for the ego clings to its dominion as a power unto itself. You will win little by observing your thoughts, not reacting to them and not resenting them. It is from this silence and awareness that you begin to annihilate the ego. When you begin to rest in the awareness of your consciousness, your ego will violently swirl and fight against your spiritual awakening. Of course, don't do what the ego suggests with your thoughts because you know that it will tempt you, make you angry, and desire people, places, and things. He wants control at all costs. In your silence, however, it will be hidden. Your ego is constantly changing shape and makes you a person of attachment to people, places, and things, and a person who seeks validation from others. It creates a desert of your deepest emotional reflections and tempts you to abandon yourself to the endless sands of its illusions. Don't worry if you don't notice ego thoughts during the day. All you have to understand is that you are not your ego, that you are not your thoughts or feelings. Let your mind and your emotions do their work. Over time, they will weaken and will not bother you anymore because you will not believe your thoughts since you will not consider them your thoughts. But you must resist the hypnotic lure of the ego. But don't react. Do not be offended by the attacks of your ego. Just let the storms of thought, emotion, memory pass through the unshakable ground of your consciousness and being. Let the thoughts and feelings pass like leaves in a river, observing them and remaining still. Do not react against them and do not resent them. Stay calm. Don't fight the ego. Just rediscover your eternal essence that has always been within you. You do not overcome the ego through violence, but by realizing that your real self was never bound by the prison of the ego because you were never your ego. Your ego will never understand that you exist as consciousness. Your ego, your character, is what it is. You must accept your ego character as it is because you cannot change your character unless you realize that you are not that character in your mind. Let the illusion of I dissolve into nothingness as the brilliant light of your consciousness will emerge in the silence and love of your awareness. Once you become aware of the fact that your ego character in your mind is just thoughts in your mind, you become what you are, the knowledge of your existence and consciousness. Then the character will also be transformed by the light that comes from the radiance of your true self. The problem with the ego is that it always feels lonely, so it begins to depend on people, places, and things for love and meaning. That's why he wants to grab, get attached, and addicted to people, places, and things. He seeks validation and pleasure externally and thus feels he exists. It always depends on external things for its existence. The ego feels lonely because it lives by imagining the past and the future. Therefore, it cannot know your true self because your self exists in the now. Your self is in the present. The true self lives in this moment of knowing and being aware of your being. The secret is not to fight the ego, but to root in the living present, the source of life and connection to all that is. The ego thinks and lives in the past and the future, so it cannot know the truth of who you are. That is, its true self now of this moment. So he is not aware of the reality of what is happening now because he lives in the imagination of the mind. Thoughts are thoughts about the future and the past. When the mind tries to think about the present, what it thinks about becomes the past. Embrace this journey, fellow seeker. The truth of your vast, radiant nature awaits your return home. Let the attachment of the ego dissolve back into the nothingness from which it came. You are immortal, because that is what you have always been even before you pulled back the veil of ego illusion and saw your true self. Your ego can only exist when it is attached to something external such as a person, place, or object. The ego exists with thoughts and feelings about these external things. When you realize that you are not your ego, little by little, you will not believe that the ego suggests to you about external things with thoughts. When you don't believe the thoughts, those thoughts are weakened and detached from the external things to which the ego is attached. Since the ego can only exist with thoughts from its attachments, when thoughts cease, there will be no ego because it exists only in thoughts. Because as we said, the ego does not know that you exist as a consciousness. That is why you cling to things, places, and people. When attachments cease, the ego ceases to exist. When there is no ego to dizzy you with its attachments, there is only your true self, the awareness of your consciousness. Have you had any experience with ego scams? Share your ideas and questions in the comments, because we all light the path when we bring light and knowledge to this spiritual journey. Created by Elias Dasinos. Please like, subscribe, and comment.